wanted to go to a video produced by the Ratner family to mark Michael's 60th birthday, talking about his legal legacy.
He's worked on a series of cases in different areas that are just pushing the ability to raise international human rights in U.S. courts.
For Helen Todd, nothing could justify the East Timor massacre which killed her son Kamal, and today a United States court agreed.
It's been a long time, and I've come halfway around the world, but I feel satisfied that at last the court has said this is wrong.
Kamal was one of 200 killed in the student protest, and the Indonesian general who ordered his troops to open fire has now been ordered to pay.
And it affected the judge very heavily. The judge, who was not familiar with this law, not familiar, probably didn't know East Timor from, Timbuktu, was incredibly, you could see she was incredibly moved. And we all left, I think, feeling bad, obviously, about what had happened, but very, very good that we had gotten, after a lot of work and a lot of people's efforts, gotten it to a trial where it was really heard.
He's really, I think, helped pioneer this type of tort law where you can actually sue dictators or sue war criminals from within the United States.
We found out early in one fall that this general was studying at the Harvard School of Government. And the students worked for most of the school year pulling together information about the general's role in genocide in Guatemala.
We needed to develop some of the facts, and the only way that we could really do some pieces were to actually interview the general. And so I sort of posed as this student doing some research on Guatemala.
Michael and I flew up to Boston and went to Harvard graduation with the papers in hand.
Michael is not afraid to sue anyone at any time.
He's still wearing his Harvard graduation robes, and the process server with a big smile held out the papers, called his name, shook his hand, and General Gramajo took the papers with a big smile.
And he's won these huge cases, but of course, many of the dictators have not forked over the billions of dollars that their victims are due.
That an excerpt of family video that was produced for Michael Ratner's 60th birthday. That story that you heard the attorney Beth Stevens talking about, the lawsuit against Hector Alejandro Gramajo, who is graduating from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. In the corner, you see Michael's profile. I was there along with journalist Alan Nairn as they, Beth Stevens and Michael Ratner and the private investigator, slapped Hector Alejandro Gramajo with this lawsuit as he was walking in to get his Harvard Kennedy School degree, slapping him with a lawsuit for crimes against humanity. We are joined by a round table of people to remember Michael Ratner, who died on Wednesday of complications due to cancer here in New York City. Michael Ratner, the longtime former head of the Center for Constitutional Rights. We're joined by Michael Smith, his colleague, co-author and friend, as well Reed Brody of Human Rights Watch, and Jules Labelle joining us from Pittsburgh, Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian Embassy in London. Give us the span of his work, Reed.
You know, from defending human rights in the United States to defending Central American revolutions against the United States, from defending HIV-positive Haitians quarantined in Guantanamo to defending Muslims taken to Guantanamo 10 years later, from defending from suing American torturers abroad to suing, as we saw, foreign torturers in America, to defending whistleblowers. For over 50 years, Michael was always instinctively on the right side of every battle, fighting the right battle from the right trench. He had this unerring ability to know where to be at the right time.
Reed, you were arrested with Michael in 1984. Can you talk, and William Kunstler, right, and yes. Arthur Conoy. Can you talk about the circumstances?
Sure. I had actually just come back from Nicaragua, where I documented systematic atrocities by the U.S.-backed Contras who were trying to undermine the Sandinista revolution. And there was a sit-in at the Federal Building in downtown Manhattan organized by the National Lawyers Guild. And Michael was there, Bill Kunstler, Arthur Kenoy, Barbara Dudley, Ron Kuby, Margaret Clements, and we were all arrested. But Michael didn't stop there. When the International Court of Justice in The Hague ordered that the United States stop funding and supporting the Contras, Michael and Jules Lobel and the CCR went into court saying, well, let's enforce this order. And actually, Michael asked me to go down to Nicaragua to talk to Americans who might be in harm's way if Contra funding continued. And I interviewed and took an affidavit from a friend named Ben Linder, who wrote in his affidavit that if the United States kept funding the Contras, he was in danger of life and limb. And of course, the lawsuit failed. Aid to an injunction was not granted, and Ben Linder was killed, the first American to be executed, the only American to be executed by the U.S.-backed Contras in Nicaragua. And then Michael defended the Linder family for many years in their suits against the Contras and against the United States.
And Michael Smith, for years you co-hosted a show, Law and Disorder, with Michael Ratner. Talk about
on WBAI.
On WBAI, yes. Talk about how you first met him, and also his perspective on the law and how lawyers dealt with the law.
I lived around the corner from Michael 30-some years ago. Michael had just gotten elected as the president of the National Lawyers Guild. I was in a 4-floor walk-up, and he schlepped up one night, and he asked me if I would be on the editorial board of Guild Notes, which is the Guild magazine. So he signed me up, and that's when we started out working together. We did 6 books together. He did the foreword or the introduction or a chapter and a number of them. We did the Che Guevara book. Michael greatly loved and admired Che, and he suspected that the U.S. story about Che's death was BS. And so he did a FOIA request. And years went by and nothing happened. And then one day, and he was telling me, we're walking down the street, and he said, he said, I just got this huge box of documents from the FBI and the CIA and the Defense Department and the White House. And what should we do? So I was representing Ocean Press at the time. And I called him up and I said, I think we got a book here. Can you hold up putting out your catalog till we look through it? And they said, sure. So Michael and I and my wife Debbie looked through it, and we figured it out, and we put it all together, and we sent it down to Australia. We put out our first book. We were on the show with you, Amy. It was 20 years ago. And then, out of nowhere, 10 years later, without Michael making a further request, he got another box of documents. And we looked at those, and there'd been a lot of historical work done in the meantime. So we were able to take these new documents, stuff on White House stationery that said the troops we trained finally got him, a memo to Johnson, the president, stuff like that. And we put the story together, and we realized that there was a prior agreement with the Bolivian dictatorship. The CIA had 2 agents that were running intelligence. The Department of Defense was funding everything from ballots to bullets, funding the Bolivian army that captured Che. The CIA agents were working the intelligence. They captured Che, and they had a prior agreement with the head of the Bolivian military that if they captured them, they'd kill them. And so that was America's doing, and we proved that. And that book is all over Cuba. They sell it for 25 cents. It was featured last year at the International Book Fair. It's all over Argentina, where Che, and it's even coming out now in Iran in Farsi, and it's going to be distributed in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan.
And Che Guevara killed in October 1967 in Bolivia.
That's right. And the moral responsibility for that, the actual responsibility for the assassination, which is a political murder, lies on the United States. There's no statute of limitations to murder. The 2 people that directed the killing are still alive. They're in Florida.
They are.
And that was one of the many contributions that Michael made.
And this whole issue of he was a lawyer who did not really overestimate the power of, or the requirements of the law. He
didn't think that. He deeply believed in democracy and the rule of law, and he didn't think that capitalism was compatible with that. He thought maybe fascism was, but certainly not. And we can see what's going on now, that he was absolutely clear-sighted on that. Michael initially started off, like all of us as liberals, thinking that the law was a civilized way of solving disputes. It may be flawed here or there, but it can be fixed and so on. Well, we all quickly got over that notion, and Michael came to believe that the law was a means of social control by the 1% who would fight to keep their control by any means necessary, as long as possible. And that was what the law was. And Michael sought to promote true democratic law and to undermine that false ideology that thought that the law we have now is somehow fair. It's not fair.
I wanted to go back to a moment with you, Michael Smith, and Michael Ratner. This was July 22nd in Washington, D.C., at the reopening of the Cuban embassy after it was closed for more than 5 decades. Michael was drenched in sweat. It was boiling hot, but it was one of the happiest times I had ever seen Michael Ratner as he talked about the significance of this historic day.
Well, Amy, let's just say, other than the birth of my children, this is perhaps one of the most exciting days of my life. I mean, I've been working on Cuba since the early 70s, if not before. I worked on the Venceremos Brigade. I went on brigades. I did construction. And to see that this can actually happen in a country that decided early on that, unlike most countries in the world, it was going to level the playing field for everyone. No more rich, no more poor, everyone the same. Education for everyone, schooling for everyone, housing if they could, and to see the relentless United States go against it, from the Bay of Pigs to utter subversion, on, and to see Cuba emerge victorious. And when I say that, this is not a defeated country. This is a country, if you heard the foreign minister today, what he spoke of was the history of U.S. imperialism against Cuba. From the intervention in the Spanish-American War to the Platt Amendment, which made U.S. a permanent part of the Cuban government, to the taking of Guantanamo, to the failure to recognize it in 1959, to the cutting off of relations in 1961. This is a major, major victory for the Cuban people, and that should be understood. We are standing at a moment that I never expected to see in our history.
Bruno Rodriguez, the foreign minister of Cuba, gave a rousing speech inside the embassy. Talk about what he said still needs to be accomplished. He wasn't exactly celebrating a total victory today.
No, because things still aren't normal. The United States is still spending $30 million a year trying to subvert the Cuban government. They still illegally are holding Guantanamo, and they still have, and this is the most important thing, because it's cost the Cuban people $1.1 trillion in funds to develop their country, they still have the blockade. So unless those 3 things are changed, you're not going to have a normal situation.
Let me tell you, as someone said to me here, if Obama wants to solve Guantanamo and the prisoners at Guantanamo, give it back to Cuba. There will be no prisoners left in Guantanamo. Easy way to do it, satisfy the Cubans, satisfy Guantanamo. Let it happen now. Think about Cuba's place in history, and we think about it for young people, not just for the fact that it leveled a society economically, gave people all the social network that we don't have in the United States, but think about its international role. You think about apartheid in South Africa, and the key single event took place in Angola when 25,000 Cuban troops repulsed the South African military and gave it its first defeat, which was the beginning of the end of apartheid. It had an internationalism that's just unbelievable. And I remember standing in 100,000 people in front of a square in Havana in 1976. I was on a Venceremos Brigade, and Fidel gave a speech, and he said, "There is black blood in every Cuban vein, and we are going into Angola." I'm telling you, I still cry over it.
That was Michael Ratner speaking July 22nd, 2015, at the opening of the Cuban embassy in Washington, D.C., after it had been closed for more than 50 years. Michael Ratner died on Wednesday, died yesterday, at the age of 72, of complications related to cancer. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back remembering his life and legacy in a moment.